Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today we're talking about communication tips for real estate agents. Now, specifically what we're digging into is how to have these casual conversations with our clients as well as potential future clients and keep the conversational flow going. Now, this is extremely important in real estate, is being able to be a good conversationalist. Now, you do not have to be the best by any means. You just have to have a few solid strategies that you use in order to communicate, in order to keep that conversation flowing. And that is what we're going to discuss today. So the first tip is called mirrored reciprocation. And if you understand this, you can get through any conversation with an agent, with a lead, with somebody at an event, with a friend, with a family member. This is truly the key to having a great conversation. Now, this concept comes from Peter Kaufman, and Peter Kaufman works very closely with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Now, he does do a lot of speeches, but apparently they are not recorded. So there's only one speech out there that I could find where he discussed this, and this will be linked up in the show notes below. But basically, the way that it works is this. How we come across to the individual will inform how they're going to come across to us. And he paints this perfect picture. He says, imagine that you see a cat and you walk up to that cat and you pick that cat up by the tail. What's that cat going to do? Well, that cat is going to scratch you. Now, what happens if you see a cat and you come up to the cat slowly and then you start petting the cat? The cat's going to purr and enjoy it. And so this is mirrored reciprocation. Basically, how we approach the individual is going to inform how they're going to come back and approach us. So if we approach somebody with a level of openness and we're excited, we're enthusiastic, and we're excited about having this conversation with them, then very likely they're going to mirror that back to us. Now, there are times where they are going to lead the conversation. So maybe an agent is calling you and they're calling and they're upset. So they're picking up the phone and they're calling you and they're going to start the conversation off on the wrong foot. So how do we end up combating this? Well, Peter Kaufman talks about this concept of be positive and be first. And so first off is this whole concept of being first. Now, when we're being first, we are the one that is leading the mirrored reciprocation. So instead of that cat coming up and scratching us right off the bat, we are the one that's coming up to the cat. And it's the same thing when it comes to a conversation. When we are approaching a conversation with a lead or an agent, if we can be the first one to show positive level of emotions towards them, then those are going to be reciprocated. However, if we let them dictate it, then potentially it's going to be more challenging. So we want to be the first one. And you could even take this one step further. And this is where we say hi to people first. So we've talked about this before, that if you're at an event, try to be the first person that says hi. When somebody's coming to an open house, don't let them say hi to you first. Instead, you welcome them. And what you're allowing for here is for you to be positive and to have that mirrored reciprocation come back to us. Okay, so now the conversation has started. What is it that we should be talking about? Well, of course, it depends on the context, but most of the time what we're discussing here is just general small talk. So how can we start communicating with people so that we keep that conversation moving forward and we're building trust, we're building a level of friendship? Well, a lot of times out there, what you're going to hear is this concept of FORD. And it's an acronym, and it stands for family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. It's a very, very common acronym used for conversation topics. Now, those 4 topics can be great to bring up with people. However, it's a little dated. Nowadays, there are different ways that we're communicating. And what I tend to prefer is HEFE. And HEFE is HEFE. You can use FORD. There's nothing wrong with FORD, but it's just starting to get a little dated. And the other concept of FORD is sometimes bringing up family and sometimes bringing up dreams might not be fully appropriate depending on the individual. But HEFE is very appropriate. We're talking about their hobbies. We're talking about entertainment, we're talking about food, and we are talking about our environment. So let's break this down a little bit further. Hobbies would be things that they are doing outside of work. And that can be a great question right there, is what's keeping you busy outside of work? And right here, then we're going to understand their hobbies. The next is entertainment. Now, entertainment is a great topic of conversation and one that a lot of us talk about on a regular basis. For example, which Netflix shows are you watching right now? Or have you watched Stranger Things? Or have you watched XYZ show? So by having this discussion, we're starting to find mutual interests, both with hobbies and with entertainment. We're starting to find mutual interest in the modern world. So this can work very, very well. Next, there's food. And the reason why food is because We all do it, everybody eats, and it tends to be a great topic of conversation that is not too polarizing. Now, there are certain topics when it comes to food that can be quite polarizing. So if we're a carnivore and we're talking to a vegan, that's going to be a difficult conversation. But generally speaking, there is some overlap. And so that we're able to start talking about food. So an example of this is we have these prepared meals that come to us once a week. And oftentimes when people are coming over and we're discussing food, we're talking about this amazing service that comes and drops off our meals. Now, we're not super proud of the fact that the meals get dropped off, but that being said, it's a great service. And it ends up being a topic of conversation for us when people come over to our house, because oftentimes we have these prepared meals that are already there for us. And finally, we have environment. And so environment, this can work great in so many different circumstances. So environment truly is the weather. So when we're talking about the weather, we're talking about our outdoor environment. But also this can be a networking event, and we're talking about the actual area that we're at, or we're talking about the actual event that we're in. Or if we're at an open house, we're talking about the house, we're talking about the community. So we're talking about things within our direct environment. Now, what all four of these things will do is, again, we're coming back to finding common interests. And these topics of conversation tend to flow very nicely. They're also not overly polarizing, but they're fun and they're engaging. And a lot of us will have a lot of topics of conversation that will flow off of these four concepts coming from HEFE. What if we do not know what to say? We do not know how to open the conversation. We understand the concept of mirrored reciprocation and be positive and be first, and we understand HEFE, but how do we actually open the conversation? When we're having conversations with people, we tend to overthink the first thing that we say, when in fact, that doesn't tend to matter. And very rarely is it remembered what is actually said at the opening of a conversation. Instead, the thing that is remembered, and this is key, is just generally the way that you make that individual feel. They're not going to remember what we say, but they are going to remember the feeling that they had when they were talking with us. And so truly, when we're opening these conversations, it's not overly important what we say. Now, of course, we don't want to say something that could definitely be jarring to the individual, but we tend to overcomplicate it, because what we want to do is we want to come up with this extremely witty first line to open the conversation, and that's not necessary. So there are two things that you can do. First off, we have the best script for your SOI. And truly, the best opener for your SOI is, hey, so-and-so, I was just thinking of you, and then let the conversation flow. That's such an easy way to start a conversation with somebody, and everybody wants to feel like somebody's thinking of them. Now, the next is if you don't know the individual. So if you are at an open house or you're at an event, and truly, the easiest thing that you can do is, hi, how are you? Now, this seems so simple, but in fact, we get up into our own heads, and again, we're trying to come up with like the perfect statement. Now, oftentimes what I will do is I'll say, hi, how are you? I'll introduce myself, and then I'll make some general comment, typically about the environment. And so maybe somebody's coming in and they got really cool shoes on, or they got a really cool bag, something like that. I will comment on the general environment. And so that is such an easy way to start a conversation with somebody that you don't necessarily know. But you don't have to overcomplicate it. This was very simple. We said, hi, how are you? To somebody that we don't necessarily know. And to somebody in our SOI, we just say, hi, I was just thinking of you, and then have the conversation start from there. Now, how do we keep that conversation going? So we have our topics through HEFE that we can start pulling on, but how can we continue to structure this conversation in a way that's engaging for both us and them? Well, we have some techniques that you can use in order to keep that conversation flow going. The first is find a topic that excites them. So when you're going through HEFE and you are finding topics that are exciting to them, so for example, if we land on hobbies and we're discussing golf and they become very excited about that, that is a perfect conversation topic. Even if I don't know anything about golf, I'm going to ask them, where do they play? Where did they learn? How long have they been playing? What are some of their favorite things? Where are some courses that they've been to outside of the city? So there's a ton of different things that we can do in order to start this conversation, to keep it going, by focusing on things that they are excited about. And even if it's something that's not interesting for you, what I tend to do is I try to learn something. So if I know nothing about golf, I'm going to try and learn something about golf. I'm going to try and learn something out there about golf that I can then take to my next conversation. So we really want to find things that excite them. Next, we want to laugh easily. We want to be in a joyous mood. And the more that we can laugh along with somebody that we're talking to, the more that bond will form. And this is truly just grounded in our physiology, is that when we're laughing with somebody else, we tend to form a bond with them. Be lighthearted about the conversation. And that tends to keep that conversation going well because it doesn't feel as serious. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come to the conversation with this amazing joke or a large array of jokes, or you have to be some sort of comedian. It just means you have to be open to laughing and giggling and talking with this person in a lighthearted way. Next, practice circling. And circling works like this. Basically, somebody says something and you say what that reminds you of. Now, this is going to take some time. When I first started to use this, I started to think through it. When I was having conversations, I was thinking, what does this remind me of? And so it took some time for me to understand what is it that these conversations are reminding me of something else. But for example, if we're coming back to our golf, if we are talking about golf and somebody's bringing that up, you can say, well, it reminds you of X sport that you play. And so what we're doing here is we're circling. We're taking the conversation and then we're spinning it in another direction as well. Now, when we're in a conversation, we are needing to be very, very present. Someone's going to say something that's going to remind us of something different. And we can say, that reminds me of this. And then we can start the conversation going in that direction. Now, we don't want to do this, of course, consistently, or else we're basically changing the direction of the conversation constantly. They bring up something, we change the direction with circling. But what circling does is it helps us bring the conversation back and it helps the conversation flow. Because when that conversation topic has been exhausted, we can then circle to something that topic reminds us of. Next, ask hypothetical questions. Now, in real estate, we actually become quite good at this topic. And hypothetical questions are, imagine something, how would you respond to it? So we do this all the time in real estate without even knowing it. So for example, imagine this kitchen was white. How would that change our perspective? Imagine the yard was larger. How would that change our perspective of this home? Imagine the price was lower. What would we think? And so we're doing this oftentimes when we're dealing with buyers and sellers. We can extend this into actual just general conversations. Now I know we're picking on golf here and I'm not sure why, but let's say I'm in a conversation with somebody and we're talking about golf. I could say, hypothetically speaking, which course would you like to play at if you could play at any course in the world and why? And so this topic of conversation is quite exciting for somebody who likes golf because they will know different courses out there and which ones they want to play. What we can do here is we can use hypothetical questions to create very interesting topics of conversation, which of course continues the conversation moving forward. Next, we want to be able to ask the question, why? Now, we don't want the why question to come across like we're interrogating them, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Instead, it's coming from a place of inquisitiveness. So we're trying to understand why they're selecting one thing over the other. So if they really like one restaurant and we're on the topic of food, we might say something along the lines of, what do you love about this restaurant versus that restaurant? And so we're asking these why questions, which then helps them start to think and again continues to have this great conversational flow. And we're going back and forth. And that's traditionally what why will do is going to get you deeper down that road of that topic. Instead of just switching the topic on surface level, we get deeper. And finally, don't be afraid to reveal your thing. Typically, when we're in these conversations as real estate agents, we want it to all be about them, and that is okay. But they also want to know about us. It's okay if we're in a given community and we have a favorite restaurant in this community. You can say, I'm a total foodie and I love this restaurant. And so now you've revealed that you are a foodie. And so that is a topic of conversation. So don't be afraid to just reveal what it is that your thing is. So if we're at an event, sometimes what our thing is real estate. So you do not have to be concerned about bringing that up. And then when we're in a real estate transaction, maybe it's about our family, about our kids, about our hobbies. And it's okay to reveal these, and we should, because then they're going to get to know us more and more trust will be built. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode. Remember, you can reach out anytime. I'm on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery or head over to revrealestateschool.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.